My name is Gal Steinberg. I am the VP of Products here at Keyless, and I am very, very happy to be here today in the conference and in this keynote presentation. And I do want to take 10 minutes to talk about the topic of current and future authentication options, specifically in the financial services and in the crypto space. And more specifically, I want to dive into kind of Keyless and who we are, and then talk about the long-lasting trade-off in authentication in a broad sense, but also in the financial services sector. And talk about the evolution of authentication options over the years, starting from passwords in the 1960s and kind of where we are today, and then dive into the future of authentication as we see it, specifically consumer authentication, and how biometrics is a method that we believe can provide a good solution to this long-lasting trade-off, and talk about the existing limitations of biometrics today and how we want to solve them going forward. And we will recap with a quick summary. So with that, Keyless, we are a deep tech identity company, and we develop what we call next generation privacy-enhancing biometric authentication solutions. So multi-factor passwordless authentication. We're a team of 50 today. 8 or actually 10 of us are PhDs coming from the domains of cryptography and biometrics. And the technology that we've built is based on over 10 years of research in the academia that we brought into commercial use. We'll talk about that later on. We are based in, we're European, our headquarters are in London, but we have a global reach. And as you can see, some of the logos on the right here, we have partnered with some of the leading identity providers out there. And, jumping right into the trade-off, right? So we do see this everlasting trade-off in the authentication space where the first kind of leg or arm is the security or fraud aspect, right? And specifically account takeover and identity theft is growing rapidly and massively over the years. So we see this increase in fraudulent logins throughout the years. The cost associated from identity theft also going up pretty quickly over the years. And interesting to see the fraction of identity theft related fraud as opposed to the total fraud landscape, which is 77%, very, very high. So we have fraud on the one hand, but the world is trying to solve the fraud problem by adding friction. And adding friction in the form of multi-factor authentication, for example, creates churn or user churn in the consumer space. So you can see, cart abandonments going up, or shoppers going through cumbersome checkout processes, and other kind of issues around user experience and unnecessary friction, which also creates kind of other aspects around maybe cart abandonment, payments, and so on. So that's the second arm, friction. And then there's the third piece of the trade-off, which is cost, right? A lot of the authentication solutions out there today may be costly. So for example, password-based authentication, we have the password reset cost, which is super, super expensive and going up every day. Cost from productivity, right? For example, I'm an employee or in the workforce environment. I lose my password, I have to contact support. A lot of hours go into this. And other kind of, spends from, for example, operational costs on SMS related to kind of usage. And on top of all of these, we also have regulation or kind of, enforcement from external forces, such as PSD2, strong customer authentication in Europe, or MFA mandates going in the US, which makes it even harder, which makes this trade-off even harder. So to summarize, there's this long-lasting trade-off in authentication between friction, fraud, costs, where compliance and regulation is kind of hovering above everything. And we believe at Keyless, at least, that customers shouldn't be required to choose, right, or to compromise on one for another. And this we think is where the future of authentication is going, right? So a product that can provide a solution to all three of them together. So what are the options out there? What authentication options for financial services exist? And to understand this, let's look at the evolution of authentication over the years, right? So we mentioned passwords as a single factor starting off in the 1960s. That evolved into the hard tokens that, unfortunately, if you ask me, still exist, which are two-factor authentication using a possession factor. That evolved into soft tokens, could be either through an SMS or an app, TOTP, so a software-based token. And lately we've been seeing the rise of biometrics, thanks to Face ID from Apple or Samsung and Microsoft likes. And biometrics really have created a new path into frictionless authentication. And why biometrics? One, well, because as I just mentioned, they provide good user experience. With face biometrics, you can just look into the camera and you have access to a service. With fingerprints, you just click a button or click the screen and you're in. They provide rather good, strong identity assurance. So you can be pretty sure that the person who enrolled is the person that is authenticating, as opposed to maybe passwords, which are prone to password or credential sharing attacks, or not attacks, credential sharing use cases. Biometrics are also applicable almost anywhere today, right? So everyone has a face in the case of face recognition. Usually people have their faces on them. So it is applicable anywhere and to anyone. It's very hard if biometrics are implemented properly to share the biometrics. Of course, we have liveness here that needs to detect if we have images, videos, or masks, and so on. But the notion of password reuse is much less evident here. And one may claim that biometrics also introduce lower operational costs. For example, if you compare biometrics as to SMSs, for example, SMSs may cost a lot of money, not only from SIM swapping attacks and fraud associated to SMSs, but also just from the usage of sending SMS messages on a larger scale. But, biometrics are great, but as we see it, the biometric solutions that exist today have some fundamental limitations. And we look at it from two main angles, or two main technologies to do biometrics today. One is local authentication. So these are the Face IDs or the Samsung fingerprint that exists today in the world. And, unfortunately, they still don't exist on all devices. Some have fingerprint, some have face. There's no portability. So what happens if you lose your device or if you have multiple devices? On the other hand, you have the centralized biometric authentication, where the biometric template is stored in a database, could be in the cloud or on premise, but creates a honeypot for attackers in the most sensitive kind of data, which is biometric data. So it's not really secure and not privacy preserving. And what we propose with Keyless is, the ability to take the best of both of these worlds without taking the bad. And I don't want to go into the technology too much. It's based on a protocol called secure multi-party computation. But what we try to do is distribute or decentralize the biometrics, meaning that we don't process or store the biometrics in one single place, but we're also not tied to a specific device, right? So this is kind of complex mathematics coming in the background here. But at the end of the day, this allows us to say, we're not processing, we're storing biometric data outside of the end user's device or any PII. And we've got this kind of technology certified by many kind of external validators, such as FIME, the lab, or other kind of external parties. And most importantly, also FIDO, right? So we've certified our technology not only on FIDO biometric certification, which assesses the false accept rate, false reject rate, anti-spoofing and liveness, but also we have a FIDO 2 certification on our authenticator. And this is super important for us because basically what this says is that, Keyless is the first vendor that does biometrics not on the device, but in a distributed manner on the cloud. And we still can be FIDO 2 compliant in terms of the security and privacy aspect that we provide. And perhaps even use this to mitigate some of the existing gaps around multi-device or backup and recovery. So just to summarize quickly, because I'm already out of time, we see a lot of options out there for financial services and for cryptos to allow authentication, right? It started off from SMSs, mobile pushes, hardware tokens still exist today. But the three leftmost columns here are, I think, the important ones, right? So biometrics. And we believe, local biometrics have the very, very important strength. Server-side biometrics have some very, very good strength. But really the combination of both of them is the future, is the next generation of authentication, which solves the trade-off between user experience, so frictionless authentication, security and fraud, and the cost aspect. I know there's a lot more to say about this, and there's a lot of more stats that we can share. I hope we have an opportunity to connect throughout this conference. You can reach out to me and gal@keyless.io, and I'll be very happy to continue the discussion. So thank you very much.